In the small town of Ever Hollow, nestled at the edge of an ancient forest, lived a young woman named Clara. She was quiet and reserved, often keeping to herself. Most people in the town didn't pay much attention to her. They saw her as someone who preferred solitude, always wandering into the woods alone. But what they didn't know was that Clara found peace in those woods. The trees seemed alive with whispers, the air smelled fresh, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves like golden threads. To Clara, the forest wasn't just a place, it was a sanctuary. One day, while exploring deeper into the woods than she ever had before, Clara stumbled upon something unusual. At first, she thought it was a pile of shimmering stones, their colors shifting between green and gold. But as she moved closer, she realized it wasn't stones at all. It was a creature. A tiny dragon, no larger than a house cat, lay curled up on the ground. Its scales sparkled faintly in the dim light of the forest, but its body trembled weakly. Clara froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had heard stories about dragons, of course, everyone had. But those were legends, tales told around campfires to scare children or entertain adults. Dragons weren't supposed to be real. The little dragon lifted its head slightly, revealing wide, frightened eyes. It let out a soft whimper, barely audible, and Clara felt her heart break. She knelt down beside it, her hands trembling as she reached out cautiously. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the creature could understand her. "I won't hurt you." The dragon didn't move away, which Clara took as a good sign. She carefully scooped it into her arms, surprised by how light it was. Its body radiated warmth, and she could feel its heartbeat fluttering rapidly against her palm. Whatever this creature was, it was clearly in trouble. Clara glanced around, wondering if anyone else was nearby. The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. There was no sign of any other dragons or creatures that might have abandoned this one here. Clara decided to take the dragon home. She wrapped it in her scarf to keep it warm and began walking back toward Ever Hollow. Her mind raced with questions. Where had this dragon come from? Why was it left here all alone? And most importantly, how could she possibly care for something so strange and mysterious? When she arrived at her small cottage on the outskirts of town, Clara placed the dragon gently on a blanket near the fireplace. She fetched a bowl of water and some scraps of bread and meat from her pantry. The dragon sniffed at the food hesitantly before devouring it greedily. Clara watched in awe as the creature ate, its tiny wings twitching with excitement. For the first time since finding it, she allowed herself to smile. Maybe taking care of this dragon wouldn't be so hard after all. Over the next few days, Clara devoted herself to nursing the dragon back to health. She named him Ember, inspired by the fiery glow of his scales when they caught the light. Ember quickly grew fond of Clara, nuzzling against her hand whenever she came near. He was playful and curious, often chasing after insects or trying to climb onto furniture that was far too big for him. Despite his small size, Ember had a personality that filled the entire house. But as the days turned into weeks, Clara noticed something concerning. Ember's appetite was insatiable. No matter how much food she gave him, he always seemed hungry. At first, she fed him scraps from her own meals, but soon that wasn't enough. She started venturing into the woods to catch rabbits and fish from the nearby river. Each trip became more challenging than the last as Ember grew bigger and stronger. What had once been a manageable task now required hours of effort. Clara tried not to worry too much. After all, Ember was still young, and perhaps his hunger would subside as he adjusted to his new life. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Dragons weren't ordinary animals. They were legendary beings, creatures of immense power and mystery. How could she possibly provide for something like that on her own? One evening, as Clara sat by the fire watching Ember gnaw on a rabbit bone, she made a decision. She couldn't keep doing this alone. If she wanted to ensure Ember's survival, she needed help. And there was only one person in Ever Hollow who might be able to assist her: John. the human supervisor of the town's agricultural depot. John was a practical man in his mid-30s, known for his no-nonsense attitude and strong work ethic. His job was to oversee the distribution of food supplies throughout the town, making sure everyone had enough to eat during both bountiful harvests and lean winters. Clara had never spoken to him directly, but she'd seen him around town. He always seemed busy, carrying ledgers or inspecting shipments of grain. Still, desperate times called for desperate measures. The next morning, Clara bundled Ember in a thick blanket to hide his gleaming scales and set off toward the depot. Her heart pounded with nerves as she approached the building. What if John refused to help her? What if he thought she was crazy for bringing a dragon into town? She pushed those thoughts aside and knocked firmly on the door. After a moment, John appeared, looking surprised to see her. "Can I help you?" he asked, glancing curiously at the bundle in her arms. Clara took a deep breath. "My name is Clara. I need your help." She hesitated, then unwrapped the blanket just enough to reveal Ember's face. The dragon blinked, up at John, his golden eyes wide and innocent. For a long moment, John simply stared. Then he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No," Clara said quickly. "He's real, and he's starving. I don't know what else to do." John frowned, clearly torn between disbelief and curiosity. Finally, he stepped aside and gestured for her to come inside. "All right," he said. "Let's talk." As they sat down at a table cluttered with papers and maps, Clara explained everything: the discovery in the forest, Ember's growing appetite, and her inability to keep up with his needs. John listened intently, occasionally glancing at the dragon peeking out from the blanket. When Clara finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I'll admit," he said slowly, "this is the strangest request I've ever gotten, but—" He paused, looking at Ember again. "There's something about him, something different." Clara nodded eagerly. "He's special, I know it. Please, John, just a little help is all I'm asking for." John sighed, weighing the risks and benefits in his mind. On one hand, helping Clara meant diverting resources that were meant for the townspeople. On the other hand, turning her away felt wrong. There was something sincere and determined about her, and Ember's presence was undeniably captivating. "All right," John said finally. "I'll give you some livestock meat, but on one condition: you have to keep him under control. If he causes any trouble, this arrangement ends immediately." Clara's face lit up with relief. "Thank you, John, you won't regret this." As she left the depot with Ember safely tucked under her arm, Clara felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, with John's help, she could find a way to provide for her extraordinary companion. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of an incredible journey, one that would change not only her life but the lives of everyone in Everhollow. Clara's relief after speaking with John was short-lived. As she walked back to her cottage with Ember in her arms, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get more complicated. She knew John had agreed to help, but his tone had been cautious, almost reluctant. It wasn't hard to understand why. Dragons weren't exactly common, and feeding one would undoubtedly raise questions among the townspeople. Clara wondered how long it would take before rumors spread. In a small town like Everhollow, secrets didn't stay hidden for long. The next morning, Clara returned to the depot to collect the meat John had promised. He handed her a sack filled with cuts of beef and lamb, avoiding eye contact as he did so. "This should last a few days," he said, his voice low. "But don't expect me to keep this up forever. I'll need to figure out a better solution." Clara nodded quickly, clutching the sack tightly. "Thank you, John, I really mean it." As she turned to leave, she noticed a man standing nearby, watching them with narrowed eyes. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scowl that seemed permanently etched onto his face. Clara recognized him as Richard, one of the farmers who frequently brought livestock to the depot. Richard was known for his gruff demeanor and quick temper, and Clara instinctively felt uneasy under his gaze. "What's going on here?" Richard demanded, stepping closer. His eyes darted between Clara and the sack in her hands. Why are you giving her all that meat? John hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. It's none of your business, Richard. Richard crossed his arms, his expression darkening. None of my business? That's prime livestock we're talking about. Meat that could feed families in this town, and you're just handing it over without an explanation? Clara felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, to run home and avoid the confrontation altogether. But before she could say anything, John stepped forward, his tone firm. I'm handling this, Richard. If there's a problem, you can take it up with me. Richard glared at John for a moment longer, then turned his attention back to Clara. You'd better have a good reason for this, he muttered before storming off. Clara let out a shaky breath. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to cause trouble. John shook his head. Don't worry about it. Just keep a low profile, all right? The less attention you draw, the better. Over the next few days, Clara focused on keeping her promise to John. She fed Ember the meat sparingly, trying to make it last as long as possible. Despite her efforts, the dragon's appetite showed no signs of slowing down. He grew bigger and stronger each day, his once tiny wings now spanning nearly 3 feet when fully extended. Clara marveled at his progress but also worried about what would happen when the food ran out. Meanwhile, word of Ember began to spread through Everhollow. People whispered about the strange noises coming from Clara's cottage at night, the soft growls and occasional bursts of flame that lit up her windows. Some were curious, others skeptical, and a few outright fearful. Among them was Richard, who hadn't forgotten the encounter at the depot. He started asking questions around town, piecing together bits of information, until he came to a startling conclusion. Clara was hiding something unusual, possibly dangerous. One evening, as Clara sat by the fire watching Ember chase shadows across the room, there was a loud knock at her door. Her heart sank. Who could it be this late at night? She wrapped Ember in a blanket to conceal his gleaming scales and cautiously opened the door. Standing outside was Richard, flanked by 2 other men from the town. Their expressions were grim, and Richard held a lantern that cast flickering light across their faces. We need to talk, he said bluntly. Clara swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. About what? About whatever it is you're hiding, Richard replied. People are saying strange things about you, Clara. They say you've got something unnatural living in your house. Is that true? Clara's mind raced. She couldn't deny it, not with Ember standing right behind her, but admitting the truth might make things worse. Before she could respond, Ember let out a low growl, the sound muffled by the blanket. Richard's eyes widened, and he took a step forward. What was that? He demanded. It's nothing, Clara insisted, though her voice trembled. Just my dog. Your dog doesn't sound like that, Richard shot back. Without waiting for permission, he pushed past her and entered the cottage. The other 2 men followed close behind. Clara's heart pounded as Richard scanned the room, his gaze landing on the bundle of blankets near the fireplace. Ember peeked out curiously, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Richard let out a sharp laugh. A dragon? He exclaimed, disbelief written all over his face. You've got to be kidding me. It's not what you think, Clara stammered. He's harmless, he's just hungry. Hungry? Richard echoed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. That thing looks like it could eat a cow whole. And where do you think it's getting its food from, huh? Probably stolen livestock, if I had to guess. That's not true, Clara protested. John's been helping me. John? Richard interrupted, his face reddening with anger. So he's in on this too? Unbelievable. You're wasting resources that belong to the entire town. And for what, some freakish pet? Clara clenched her fists, tears welling up in her eyes. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that Ember wasn't just some monster, that he was intelligent, gentle, and worth protecting. But the words caught in her throat. How could she make them understand? Before the argument could escalate further, a calm voice broke through the tension. That's enough, Richard. Everyone turned to see John standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I heard the commotion and came as soon as I could. What's going on here? Richard pointed accusingly at Clara. She's been feeding that thing with our food. You've been helping her, haven't you? John sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yes, I have. And I stand by my decision. This isn't some wild beast we're dealing with. Look at him, he's intelligent, he responds to commands. There's potential here, Richard. Potential we can't ignore. Richard snorted. Potential? For what? Destruction? Chaos? You're playing with fire, John. No, John countered firmly. I'm trying to find a solution, something that benefits everyone. The room fell silent as the two men stared each other down. Finally, Richard shook his head in disgust. Fine, do what you want. But when this goes wrong, and it will, you'll have no one to blame but yourselves. With that, he stormed out, the other two men trailing after him. Once they were gone, Clara collapsed onto a chair, her legs trembling beneath her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant for any of this to happen. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Don't apologize. None of this is your fault. We'll figure it out together, okay? But we need to be smart about it. No more sneaking around. It's time to show the town what Ember's really capable of. Clara looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. You really think we can change their minds? I do, John said with a nod. But it won't be easy. We'll need to prove that Ember isn't a threat, that he's an asset. Are you ready for that? Clara glanced at Ember, who was watching her intently, his head tilted slightly to one side. She smiled despite herself. Yes, she said. I'm ready. In the days that followed, Clara and John worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with the townspeople. They spent hours training Ember, teaching him simple commands and tricks to demonstrate his intelligence. Ember proved to be a quick learner, responding eagerly to Clara's guidance. By the end of the week, he could fetch objects, sit on command, and even extinguish small fires with precise bursts of cold air, a skill that left both Clara and John amazed. Despite their progress, tensions in Everhollow continued to rise. Richard fueled the growing unrest, spreading fear and misinformation wherever he went. He claimed that Ember was a danger to the town, that dragons were unpredictable and destructive by nature. Some people listened, while others remained undecided, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, the day arrived when Clara and John decided it was time to address the town. They arranged a meeting in the central square, inviting everyone to come and witness Ember's abilities firsthand. As the sun set and the crowd gathered, Clara felt a mix of excitement and dread. This was their chance to change hearts and minds, but it was also a risk. If things went wrong, it could mean disaster for both her and Ember. When the square was full, John stepped forward, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know there's been a lot of talk lately about something unusual happening in our town. Tonight we're here to clear the air. He gestured for Clara to join him, and together, they unveiled Ember, who stood proudly beside them, his scales shimmering in the torchlight. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people caught their first glimpse of the dragon. Some stepped back in fear, while others leaned forward in fascination. This is Ember, Clara said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. He's not a threat. He's intelligent, gentle, and capable of amazing things. Let us show you. With that, she began issuing commands. Ember responded flawlessly, performing each task with precision and grace. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the dragon demonstrated his skills, his movements fluid and controlled. And the demonstration in the town square had gone better than Clara and John could have hoped. Many of the townspeople left with smiles on their faces, whispering to each other about how incredible Ember was. Some even approached Clara afterward, congratulating her and asking questions about the dragon. For the first time since she'd brought Ember into her life, Clara felt a glimmer of acceptance. But not everyone was convinced. Richard remained unconvinced, his scowl deepening as he watched the crowd disperse. He muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he turned and walked away. Clara noticed him leave but didn't say anything. She knew Richard wouldn't change his mind easily, and she couldn't waste time worrying about him when so many others seemed willing to give Ember a chance. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Richard would find a way to make trouble for them. Over the next few days, life in Everhollow began to shift. People started visiting Clara's cottage, curious to see Ember up close. At first, Clara was hesitant to let strangers near him, but John reassured her that it was important to build trust. If they see how gentle he is, John said, they'll stop seeing him as a threat. Ember, for his part, seemed to enjoy the attention. He greeted visitors with playful chirps and nuzzles, careful not to scare anyone. The more people interacted with him, the more they warmed up to the idea of having a dragon in their midst. Some even offered to help by bringing scraps of food or old blankets to line his sleeping area. Clara was overwhelmed by their kindness, though she suspected it was partly driven by curiosity rather than genuine affection. Despite the growing support, challenges remained. Ember's appetite continued to grow, and the meat John provided from the depot wasn't enough to sustain him. Clara tried supplementing his diet with vegetables and grains, but Ember turned his nose up at anything that wasn't meat. It was clear that finding a sustainable solution for feeding him was becoming urgent. John spent hours brainstorming ideas, poring over agricultural reports and consulting with farmers in town. One evening, while sitting at Clara's kitchen table, he finally spoke up. "What if we used excess produce?" he suggested. "During harvest season, there's always surplus food that goes to waste. We could process it into nutrient-rich pellets designed specifically for dragons." Clara tilted, her head considering the idea. "Do you think it would work? Would he eat something like that?" "It's worth a try," John replied. "We'll need to experiment a bit, but if we can create a balanced diet for him, it might solve our problem." Excited by the possibility, Clara agreed to test the idea. Over the next week, John gathered leftover crops, corn, potatoes, and squash, and worked with Clara to grind them into a fine powder. They mixed the powder with small amounts of meat and shaped it into pellet-sized portions. When they presented the new food to Ember, he sniffed it cautiously before taking a bite. To their relief, he seemed to like it, devouring the entire batch within minutes. "That's amazing," Clara exclaimed, watching Ember lick his lips contentedly. "If this works, we won't have to rely on livestock anymore." John smiled, though his expression was still tinged with caution. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll need to monitor him closely to make sure it meets all his nutritional needs. But if it does, well, this could be a game changer." While Clara and John focused on solving Ember's dietary issues, Richard grew increasingly frustrated. He couldn't understand why the townspeople were so quick to accept the dragon, especially after everything he'd said about the risks. In his mind, Ember was still a danger waiting to happen. Determined to prove his point, Richard began gathering evidence to show just how much damage the dragon could cause. One afternoon, Richard sneaked onto Clara's property while she was out running errands. He crept toward the cottage, peering through the windows until he spotted Ember curled up near the fireplace. The dragon looked peaceful enough, but Richard wasn't interested in peace. He wanted proof of destruction. Spotting a stack of wooden crates in the corner of the room, he smirked. If he could provoke the dragon into knocking them over, he'd have the perfect example of its reckless behavior. Carefully, Richard opened the door and tossed a rock inside, aiming for the crates. The noise startled Ember, who jumped to his feet and flapped his wings instinctively. The movement sent the crates tumbling to the floor with a loud crash. Satisfied, Richard slipped away before Clara returned. When Clara arrived home later that evening, she was horrified to find the mess. Broken wood littered the floor, and Ember cowered nearby, looking guilty. Before she could figure out what had happened, there was a knock at the door. Richard stood outside, accompanied by several townspeople. "Looks like your dragon has been causing trouble again," Richard said smugly, gesturing toward the chaos inside. "I thought you said he was harmless." Clara's heart sank. She glanced at Ember, who whimpered softly, clearly upset. "This isn't what it looks like," she stammered. "He wouldn't do something like this unless provoked," John interrupted, stepping forward. He had been passing by and noticed the commotion. Someone must have come here and scared him. This wasn't Ember's fault. Richard scoffed. "And how do you know that? You weren't here." "No," John admitted. "But I know Ember. He's intelligent and cautious. He doesn't destroy things without reason. If someone threw a rock or made a loud noise, it would explain his reaction." The accusation hung in the air, and Richard's face reddened. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying it's suspicious that you showed up right after this happened," John shot back. "If you're so worried about the town, maybe you should focus on being honest instead of stirring up fear." The crowd murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement with John. Richard clenched his fists, clearly angry but unable to argue further without incriminating himself. After a tense moment, he stormed off, leaving Clara and John to clean up the mess. Though the incident with the crates was resolved, it highlighted the ongoing tension between those who supported Ember and those who opposed him. Richard continued to sow doubt wherever he went, but his influence was waning. More and more people were beginning to see Ember not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Inspired by the success of the nutrient-rich pellets, John proposed another idea: using Ember's unique abilities to benefit the town. "Think about it," he said during one of their late-night discussions. "He's strong, fast, and intelligent. There are tasks he could perform that would save us time and effort." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "Like hauling heavy loads or guarding the fields?" "Exactly," John replied. "If we train him properly, he could become a valuable asset to the community." They decided to start small, teaching Ember basic farm-related tasks. At first, it was simple things like carrying baskets of apples or pulling a cart loaded with hay. Ember took to the work enthusiastically, seeming to enjoy the sense of purpose it gave him. As word spread about his contributions, even some of Richard's supporters began to soften their stance. One morning, as Clara and John watched Ember ferry supplies across a field, a group of farmers approached them. "We've been thinking," one of them said, scratching his beard. "If that dragon can handle heavy lifting, maybe he could help us with plowing too. Our oxen are getting old and it's hard to keep up with the workload." Clara hesitated, unsure if Ember was ready for such a demanding task. But John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll take it slow," he said. "Let's see how he handles it." To everyone's surprise, Ember excelled at plowing. His strength and precision made the job faster and easier than anyone had anticipated. The farmers cheered, patting Ember on the side and offering him treats as a reward. For the first time, Clara saw true acceptance in their eyes. Not just tolerance, but genuine appreciation. As weeks turned into months, Ember became an integral part of Everhollow's daily life. He helped with farming, protected crops from predators, and even assisted in rescuing a child who had wandered too far into the woods. Each act of kindness further cemented his place in the hearts of the townspeople. Even Richard, though still skeptical, found it harder to argue against the dragon's usefulness. Clara often found herself reflecting on how far they'd come. What had started as a desperate attempt to feed a starving creature had blossomed into something extraordinary, a partnership that bridged the gap between humans and mythical beings. And yet, she knew their journey was far from over. There would always be challenges, always be doubters. But as long as she had Ember by her side, and John's unwavering support, she felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. One evening, as Clara sat by the fire watching Ember sleep, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The road had been difficult, filled with obstacles and moments of doubt. But through it all, one thing had remained constant: Ember's loyalty and love. Whatever the future held, she knew they would face it together. As the seasons changed, Everhollow settled into a rhythm that included Ember as part of its daily life. The townspeople had grown accustomed to seeing him around, whether it was pulling carts in the fields, helping stack firewood, or chasing away foxes that threatened the chicken coops. Clara and John continued to work tirelessly to ensure Ember's integration into the community went smoothly. They knew there was still resistance from some corners, but for the most part, the town, seemed willing to embrace the dragon. One crisp autumn morning, Clara woke early to prepare Ember for another day of work. She had started keeping a detailed journal of his activities, noting how much food he consumed, how long he worked, and any new behaviors he exhibited. It wasn't just for her own records. She hoped it might help others understand dragons better if they ever encountered one in the future. As she scribbled notes by candlelight, Ember nudged her arm playfully, eager to get outside. All right, Clara laughed, setting the journal aside. Let's go. When they arrived at the fields where several farmers were already working, John greeted them with a smile. Big day today, he said, handing Clara a small bag filled with the nutrient-rich pellets they'd perfected. We're going to try something new with Ember. Clara raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? We've been thinking about ways to expand his role, John explained. He's great at manual labor, but what if we test his ability to respond to more complex tasks? Things like problem-solving or decision-making. Clara hesitated, glancing at Ember. He was watching them curiously, his head tilted slightly to one side. Do you think he's ready for that? I think it's worth trying, John replied. If we can prove he's capable of more than physical strength, it'll silence any lingering doubts people might have. With that, they set up a series of challenges designed to test Ember's intelligence. The first involved stacking wooden crates in a specific order based on color and size. At first, Ember seemed confused, pawing at the crates uncertainly, but when Clara knelt beside him and demonstrated what she wanted, he quickly caught on. Within minutes, he was arranging the crates perfectly, earning cheers from the farmers who had gathered to watch. The second challenge was trickier, solving a simple puzzle to retrieve a treat hidden inside a locked box. Clara showed Ember how to press a lever that would open the lid, and after a few attempts, he succeeded. His triumphant chirp made everyone laugh, and even the skeptics couldn't hide their amazement. By the end of the day, Ember had completed every task they gave him, proving not only his intelligence but also his adaptability. Clara felt a swell of pride as she watched him bask in the praise of the townspeople. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were building something truly special. Despite the success of the challenges, Richard remained a thorn in their side. Though fewer people listened to him now, he refused to give up his crusade against Ember. One evening, while drinking at the local tavern, he voiced his frustrations to anyone who would listen. That dragon's too smart, he muttered darkly. It's unnatural. Mark my words, it'll turn on us sooner or later. His words fell mostly on deaf ears, but a few patrons exchanged uneasy glances. Among them was Mary, a middle-aged woman who ran the town's general store. She had always been cautious about Ember, though she kept her opinions to herself. Now hearing Richard's warnings reignited her fears. The next morning, Mary approached Clara at the market. "Can I speak with you?" she asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one overheard. Clara nodded, sensing the seriousness in Mary's tone. "Of course." Mary hesitated before speaking. "I don't want to cause trouble, Clara, but, well, some of us are worried. That dragon of yours, he's clever, yes, but isn't that dangerous? What if he decides he doesn't need us anymore?" "What then?" Clara sighed, understanding the concern but feeling frustrated all the same. "Ember isn't like that," she said firmly. "He's loyal, Mary. You've seen how he helps us, how he protects the fields and works alongside the farmers. He's not a threat." "But what if something changes?" Mary pressed. "Dragons aren't meant to live among humans, are they? Maybe it's better if he goes back to wherever he came from." Clara's heart sank. She had feared this moment would come, the suggestion that Ember didn't belong in Everhollow. "He wouldn't survive out there," she said softly. "Not without me. And besides, he's part of this town now. We've worked so hard to show everyone that he's not dangerous." Mary looked unconvinced but didn't argue further. "Just be careful, okay? For all our sakes." The conversation weighed heavily on Clara as she returned home. She found Ember lounging near the fireplace, his tail swishing lazily. Sitting beside him, she rested her head against his warm scales, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "What am I supposed to do, Ember?" she whispered. "How do I convince them that you're here to stay?" Ember let out a soft rumble, nudging her gently as if to say, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out." For a while, Clara allowed herself to take comfort in his presence. But deep down, she knew Mary's concerns weren't isolated. There would always be people who saw Ember as a risk, no matter how much good he did. If they were going to secure his place in Everhollow permanently, they needed to take things to the next level. That night, Clara shared her thoughts with John during one of their regular meetings. "What if we taught him to do something truly extraordinary?" she suggested. "Something that would benefit the entire town in a way no one could argue with." John leaned back in his chair, considering the idea. "Like what?" "I'm not sure yet," Clara admitted. "But what if we trained him to predict storms, or warn us about wildfires? Dragons are connected to nature somehow. It's in their instincts. If we could harness that..." John's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. If Ember could act as a guardian for the town, not just physically but environmentally, it would change everything. People wouldn't see him as a burden anymore. They'd see him as essential." Excited by the prospect, they began researching weather patterns and natural disasters common to the region. Over the next few weeks, they experimented with teaching Ember to recognize signs of impending storms, changes in wind direction, shifts in temperature, and the smell of rain in the air. At first, it was slow going. Ember struggled to connect abstract cues with concrete actions. But with patience and persistence, he eventually learned to alert them whenever danger loomed. Their breakthrough came during a particularly violent storm that swept through Everhollow without warning. Most of the townspeople had gone to bed unaware of the approaching tempest until Ember let out a loud roar, startling everyone awake. Clara rushed outside to find him standing atop a hill, his wings spread wide as he called attention to the dark clouds gathering overhead. Thanks to his warning, the townspeople had enough time to secure their homes and livestock before the storm hit. When dawn broke and the skies cleared, the entire town gathered in the square to thank Ember. Even Mary approached Clara, tears in her eyes. "You were right," she said simply. "He saved us." Richard, however, remained silent. For once, he had no arguments to make. As the crowd cheered and patted Ember affectionately, Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was it, the turning point they had been waiting for. Ember wasn't just tolerated now, he was celebrated. In the days that followed, life in Everhollow took on a new vibrancy. With Ember officially recognized as a protector of the town, the last remnants of fear and distrust began to fade. Farmers relied on him to guard their crops, children begged their parents to let them visit him, and even the elderly warmed to his presence, sharing stories of mythical creatures from their youth. Clara and John continued to explore Ember's potential, discovering new abilities and talents that amazed everyone. He could sense water sources underground, detect predators lurking in the woods, and even communicate basic emotions through gestures and sounds. Each revelation brought them closer to understanding the true depth of his intelligence, and the bond between human and dragon grew stronger with each passing day. Yet despite their progress, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to learn. Ember was unlike anything she, or anyone else, had ever encountered. What secrets lay hidden beneath his shimmering scales? And what other wonders might he reveal as he continued to grow? For now, though, Clara chose to focus on the present. Together with John and the rest of the town, she had built something remarkable, a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and mutual benefit. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. After all, Ember wasn't just a dragon, he was family. As winter approached, Everhollow braced itself for the cold months ahead. The townspeople busied themselves with preparations, stockpiling firewood, repairing roofs, and ensuring their livestock had enough feed to last through the snow. For Clara, this meant finding new ways to keep Ember active and engaged despite the harsh weather. Though he had grown accustomed to helping around the town, Ember's energy was boundless, and idle days indoors left him restless. One frosty morning, as Clara bundled herself in a thick coat and scarf, she noticed something unusual in the distance. A thin column of smoke rose above the trees near the edge of the forest. Her heart sank. Fires were rare in Everhollow, especially during winter when everything was damp from snow and rain. But there it was, a plume of gray twisting into the sky. "Ember!" Clara called, rushing back inside to grab her gloves. "We need to check this out." The dragon perked up immediately, sensing the urgency in her voice. Within moments, they were racing toward the forest, their breath visible in the icy air. As they drew closer, the source of the smoke became clear. A small cabin nestled among the trees was engulfed in flames. Orange light flickered against the snow-covered ground, and the crackling sound of burning wood filled the air. Clara froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. She could see no one nearby, no signs of life at all. Then she heard a faint cry coming from inside the cabin. Without hesitation, she turned to Ember. "Can you help me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ember let out a low growl, his golden eyes locking onto hers. He understood. With a powerful leap, he bounded toward the flames, disappearing into the smoke-filled doorway. Clara waited anxiously outside, clutching her arms tightly as she watched the fire consume the structure. Seconds felt like hours until finally Ember emerged, cradling a small figure in his massive claws. It was a child, an elderly woman's grandson who often played in the woods. The boy coughed weakly, but was otherwise unharmed thanks to Ember's quick thinking. Clara rushed forward, wrapping the boy in her coat before carrying him to safety. By the time the townspeople arrived to put out the fire, the worst was over. Word of Ember's heroic act spread quickly throughout Everhollow. That evening, the entire town gathered in the square to honor him. Even those who had once doubted his presence now hailed him as a hero. Richard stood silently at the back of the crowd, his usual scowl replaced by an unreadable expression. For the first time, it seemed, he had nothing to say. The incident strengthened the bond between Ember and the townspeople, but it also sparked a new wave of curiosity about his abilities. John suggested organizing regular training sessions where people could learn how to interact with Ember safely and effectively. "If we're going to rely on him for protection," John explained during one of his meetings with Clara, "then everyone needs to know how to work with him." Clara agreed, though she worried about overwhelming Ember. Still, the idea of teaching others to trust and respect him excited her. Over the following weeks, groups of townsfolk began visiting Clara's cottage to participate in these sessions. They learned basic commands, practiced staying calm in his presence, and even experimented with using Ember's keen senses to locate lost items or scout unfamiliar areas. One day, while leading a group through a mock search and rescue exercise, Clara noticed something unexpected. Ember wasn't just responding to her instructions, he was anticipating them. When someone dropped a keychain accidentally, Ember retrieved it before anyone asked. When a child wandered too far during a demonstration, Ember gently guided them back without prompting. It was as if he could sense their needs before they voiced them. John observed this behavior closely, jotting notes in a worn notebook. "This is incredible," he murmured to Clara later that evening. "He's not just intelligent, he's empathetic. He understands emotions, intentions, maybe even thoughts." Clara nodded, her chest swelling with pride. "I always knew he was special," she said softly. "But I never imagined he'd be this extraordinary." Despite the growing admiration for Ember, challenges remained. His size and strength continued to pose logistical issues, particularly when it came to housing and feeding him. Though the nutrient-rich pellets had solved part of the problem, Ember's rapid growth meant he required larger quantities of food than ever before. The cost of producing the pellets strained the town's resources, and whispers of discontent began to surface again. Richard seized the opportunity to reignite his campaign against Ember. At a town meeting, he stood up and addressed the crowd. "We can't keep pouring our supplies into feeding that creature," he argued, his voice sharp. Yes, he saved us a few times, but at what cost? How long until we run out of food entirely? His words struck a nerve. Some townspeople nodded in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Clara clenched her fists, fighting the urge to defend Ember right then and there. Instead, she waited for John to speak. "We're aware of the challenges," John said calmly, stepping forward. "But we're also working on solutions. Ember isn't just consuming resources, he's contributing to the town in countless ways. If we abandon him now, we lose everything we've gained." "And what happens when spring comes?" Richard shot back. "When predators return or crops fail? Will your precious dragon stick around then, or will he fly off to find greener pastures?" Clara couldn't stay silent any longer. "Ember isn't going anywhere," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside her. "He's loyal, not just to me but to all of you. Every day he proves that he's here to help, not harm. Don't let fear blind you to what he's done for us." The room fell silent as Clara's words hung in the air. Slowly, heads began to nod in agreement. Even Richard seemed taken aback by her conviction. Though he didn't concede outright, his resolve appeared to waver. Determined to address the concerns about resources, Clara and John devised a plan to involve Ember more directly in the town's agricultural efforts. They trained him to assist, with planting seeds, aerating soil, and even irrigating fields by creating controlled bursts of water vapor with his breath. Farmers marveled at how efficiently he worked, completing tasks in half the time it took humans. His contributions not only eased the strain on supplies but also boosted morale, reminding everyone why they had embraced him in the first place. One afternoon, while supervising Ember as he helped plow a field, Clara noticed a group of children watching from a distance. Their eyes sparkled with awe as they whispered to each other, pointing at the dragon. One brave girl stepped forward, holding out a piece of fruit. "For Ember," she said shyly. Clara smiled, encouraging Ember to accept the offering. He lowered his head gently, taking the fruit with care. The girl giggled, delighted, and soon the other children joined in, presenting him with small gifts, crumbs of bread, shiny stones, and even handmade drawings. Watching the scene unfold, Clara realized something profound. Ember wasn't just changing the way people thought about dragons. He was changing the way they thought about kindness, cooperation, and trust. As the weeks passed, the town grew quieter, settling into a peaceful rhythm. Snow blanketed the fields, muffling sounds and softening the edges of the world. Ember spent most evenings curled up by the fire in Clara's cottage, his warmth driving away the chill. Clara often sat beside him, reading aloud from books she borrowed from the library, or simply enjoying the quiet companionship. One night, as she gazed into the flames, she reflected on how much had changed since she first found Ember in the forest. Back then, she had been desperate, unsure of how to care for him or convince others to accept him. Now, he was an integral part of Everhollow, a protector, a worker, and a friend. Yet, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to discover about him. What other secrets lay hidden beneath his shimmering scales? What other wonders might he reveal as he continued to grow? For now, though, Clara chose to focus on gratitude. Together with John and the rest of the town, she had built something remarkable, a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and mutual benefit. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. After all, Ember wasn't just a dragon, he was family. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, lulled by the rhythmic sound of Ember's breathing, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear. Ember's presence had transformed Everhollow in ways no one could have imagined. Spring arrived in Everhollow, bringing with it the promise of renewal. The snow melted away, revealing lush green fields and budding trees. The town buzzed with activity as people prepared for the planting season, eager to make the most of the fertile soil and warm weather. For Clara, this marked a new chapter, not just for her, but for Ember as well. Over the past months, he had grown into a magnificent creature, his wingspan stretching wider than ever before. and his presence commanded both awe and admiration. Every morning, Clara and Ember joined the farmers in the fields, working side by side to prepare the land for crops. Ember's strength made quick work of plowing, while his keen senses helped locate underground water sources that would ensure a bountiful harvest. Children often tagged along, laughing as they raced alongside him or tried to climb onto his back. He tolerated their antics with patient grace, letting out playful chirps that echoed across the countryside. Despite the harmony, Clara couldn't ignore the subtle changes in Ember. His movements were more deliberate now, his gaze sharper, as if he were constantly observing and learning. She noticed moments when he seemed lost in thought, staring off into the distance as though listening to something only he could hear. It was as if he were growing not just physically but mentally, becoming something greater than anyone had anticipated. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara sat on a hill overlooking the town. Ember lay beside her, his tail swishing lazily in the cool breeze. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. "I mean, do you feel happy here?" Ember turned his head to look at her, his golden eyes gleaming, with an intelligence that still took her breath away. He nudged her gently as if to say, "Of course I am." Clara smiled, leaning against his warm scales. "It's just, sometimes I wonder if there's more out there for you, more than this little town, more than me." John approached them then, carrying 2 mugs of hot tea. He handed one to Clara and settled down beside her. "You're thinking about letting him go, aren't you?" he said, his tone gentle but knowing. Clara hesitated, wrapping her hands around the mug. "Not exactly, but what if there's something bigger waiting for him? Something we can't even imagine? I don't want to hold him back." John nodded, slowly, gazing out at the horizon. "That's a tough question, but I think you already know the answer. Ember isn't just your responsibility anymore. He belongs to this town, to all of us. If he stays, it's because he chooses to. And if he leaves, it'll be for the same reason." Clara sighed, feeling the weight of his words. She wanted nothing more than for Ember to stay, but she also knew that forcing him to remain would betray everything they had worked so hard to build, a relationship based on trust and freedom. The next day, as Clara and John prepared for another round of training exercises, Ember surprised them. Instead of following their usual routine, he took to the skies, soaring higher and farther than he ever had before. The townspeople paused their work to watch, shielding their eyes from the sun as they tracked his flight. For a moment, Clara felt a pang of fear. What if he didn't come back? But then something remarkable happened. As Ember reached the edge of the forest, he let out a loud roar, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the earth beneath their feet. Moments later, a shadow moved among the trees, then another, and another. From the depths of the woods emerged 3 dragons, each larger and more majestic than the last. Their scales shimmered in hues of red, blue, and silver, and their eyes glowed with ancient wisdom. The townspeople gasped, some stepping back in alarm. But Ember landed gracefully between the newcomers and the crowd, spreading his wings protectively. It was clear he wasn't afraid of them, and neither should anyone else be. Clara exchanged a glance with John, who looked just as stunned as she felt. "What's happening?" she whispered. "I think," John began, his voice barely audible. "I think these are his kin." As if to confirm his suspicion, one of the dragons stepped forward, lowering its massive head to meet Ember's gaze. They exchanged a series of low growls and chirps, a language no human could understand. After a few minutes, Ember turned back to face the townspeople, his expression calm but resolute. He's saying goodbye, Clara realized, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. Ember had found his family, and now it was time for him to leave. The townspeople gathered in the square, watching silently as Ember approached each person, nuzzling them gently in farewell. When he reached Clara, he paused, resting his head against hers for a long moment. She wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. For everything. With one final roar, Ember spread his wings and took to the sky, joining the other dragons as they soared toward the horizon. The townspeople watched until they disappeared from sight, leaving behind an eerie stillness. In the days that followed, life in Ever Hollow returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an extraordinary event. The fields flourished under the care of the farmers, and the memory of Ember lingered like a cherished dream. Clara struggled with the emptiness at first, finding herself staring out the window or wandering aimlessly through the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. But over time, she came to accept that Ember's departure wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. One afternoon, as Clara tended to her garden, John joined her, carrying a small wooden box. "I made something for you," he said, handing it over. Inside was a carving of Ember, his wings spread wide and his tail curled elegantly. It was simple but beautiful, capturing the essence of the dragon who had changed their lives forever. "It's perfect," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." John smiled, sitting down beside her. "He left a mark on this town, Clara. On all of us. We'll never forget him." Clara nodded, clutching the carving close to her chest. "No, we won't, and maybe someday he'll come back, even if it's just for a visit." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the trees. The wind carried the faint scent of blooming flowers, and for the first time in weeks, Clara felt at peace. Ember had taught them so much, not just about dragons, but about trust, courage, and the power of connection. Though he was gone, his legacy lived on in every field he had tilled, every child he had delighted, and every heart he had touched. And deep down, Clara believed that wherever Ember was, he was happy. That was all that mattered.